Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and happy to give you actionable ideas to elevate your current or perhaps your future nonprofit organization. Thanks for listening. If you want to be a nonprofit leader, or maybe just more effective in the role you're in now, you're in the right place. I'm glad to bring you these weekly conversations with nonprofit leaders who are really on the cutting edge of our sector. And if you would do me a favor, find the share button. Usually it's within the episode graphic on the device you're holding right now. And share this episode with one other person. We'll continue to build a global community focused on nonprofit leadership. Well, I had a wonderful conversation in this episode with Dave Lennox, who brings fantastic experience in the nonprofit sector as he served as a state-level executive director for nonprofits across the United States, in West Virginia, North Carolina, and in the state of Washington. And that's just part of his career journey. And now his work through the Valtas Group in the Seattle area keeps him on the front line of all of the nonprofit leadership issues that I bet you're contemplating right now. Given his experience, I knew he'd be the perfect person to talk about the key challenges facing individual nonprofit leaders as well as the organizations they serve. And what are they doing to better accommodate the disruptions that face all of us in this COVID environment and the transitions that inevitably occur? Also didn't miss the opportunity to ask Dave about some of the key issues that are likely in part of your organization's discussion: board development, DEI, and what are the best candidates doing to display their talent in terms of executive searches happening right now. All this and much more. This is episode number 141. Make sure you go to the podcast or the news page at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll see the show notes for this episode and all of the resources we discussed, as well as more information on Dave and the great work he's doing through the Valtas Group in the Pacific Northwest. Speaking of resources, while you're on our website, make sure you connect with us. We're on all of the social media platforms, including YouTube, and you can get on our email list and make sure you get free resources that we're putting out every week, including direct links to episodes just like this one. And as always, if you'd like to talk about your nonprofit leadership journey, schedule some time to talk about it. We'd be happy to discuss your nonprofit organization and its strategic planning or fundraising activities, or perhaps more importantly, your leadership journey, especially if we can help you with some of our coaching, training, or our unique mastermind program. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dave Lennox. Dave, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Excited to reconnect with you, Dave. You and I go way back in our career journeys. We'll try not to put a timeline exactly on that. But you've had a fantastic career in the sector. Obviously, you and I have a shared affinity for Special Olympics, and you've gone on to do wonderful things, literally allowing you to look at both the U.S. and an international perspective on nonprofit leadership. And of course, I think your work now at the Valtas Group has allowed you to bring together all of those great experiences and knowledge you've gained. In fact, as you look at nonprofit leadership now and leaders in particular, what's the biggest challenge you're seeing right now?
I think the biggest thing that people are facing is just having the confidence to know what to do and the humility to know that you probably don't really know all the answers. I think right now I see leaders struggle, and it's, when I talk to them, it's like, you need to have kind of a combination of the 3 C's, courage, confidence, and communication.
Yep.
Have the courage to do what you know you need to do, or you think you need to do. Have the confidence to believe in yourself.
Yes.
You're there for a reason. Do it, but communicate. Let people know and learn when you communicate. I think that's the biggest thing, is that so many people feel like, oh, I've got to know the answer.
To your point, the humility necessary to admit, maybe I don't have the answer, but I'm willing to ask the good questions.
Yeah, and learn the answer so you can use it next time.
Well, we'll talk more about this, Dave, because I know part of the work you do at the Valtas Group is around searches and executive and leadership searches. But let's talk about that first. What exactly is the Valtas Group, and what are you doing there?
So Valtas Group is designed to kind of help organizations. We call it social sector organizations because not all of our clients are not for profit. Some of them are for profit or government or something, but they're in transition. And Valtas is a term that is references making this kind of transition. So we have three real lines of work we do. One is that we provide interim CEOs or executive directors for organizations that find themselves in that transition. The interim might keep the wheels on the bus while you're doing it, and it also might help right the ship. So kind of helps the board have a little time to say, okay, what are we doing and where are we going and who are we looking for, so they don't just jump immediately into a search and do that kind of from an emotional perspective. They can do it now from a very empirical perspective and say, okay, here's where we are, here's where we want to go. Now we know who we're looking for. And then we also do the search stuff. So ideally, if we've done both of them, then we can very easily tell candidates, okay, here's where this organization is, here's where they're going, here's who they're looking for. Here's the warts that every organization has, so we can do that in good faith. So we'll do all that, and then also we do project work, which might be board development. We might be able to help with board recruitment or strategic planning or organizational assessments, things like that. Just whatever an organization needs when they find themselves in a position of either thinking they might need to, or they find that they know they need to make a transition in leadership.
I'm sure you have this conversation a lot, Dave, with nonprofits, I guess in particular. There's an urgency, isn't there, when a transition occurs at the top? We need to hurry and hire the successor. So you're making the case, though, I guess, right? Don't rush into it. Or what is the nature of that conversation?
Well, especially now with COVID, what we're finding is, there's something has happened. It could be that a long-serving executive director is leaving or CEO is leaving, and the board's like, oh no, we counted on them to know everything.
Exactly.
And so then they immediately rush out and they go, how do we find someone who's just like the saint that we had before?
Yeah.
That almost never works. Or someone, they've had to let the executive director go. Something's happened, and so now there's bad blood, and they're like, okay, we need someone who's the exact opposite of who we had before.
Overreact. Right.
Exactly. So I call that the pendulum.
Yep.
It's like you're either, we love where we were, so we want to just stay right exactly where we were, or oh my God, we hated where we were, so we want someone who's going to take us the complete opposite direction. Both of those are backward focused.
Yep.
Right. So what we do is we can come in and say, you know what, take a breath. You've got a seasoned, we've got 25 consultants who have all been not-for-profit executive directors. They've been in all different kind of sectors. So they can come in and just, because it's not our organization, it's your organization, but we know what we're doing. We know how to look at organizations. We know how to look at the structure. We know how to look at the leadership models, and then say, okay, here's the deal. You need to increase the delegation stuff. You need to maybe look at a distributed leadership model that will kind of help you be more effective, and then can kind of help the board understand this is an opportunity. You've got to transition. Don't make it a crisis. Make it an opportunity. And where do you want to go? Now you've kind of got a break here. You can take some time. You don't have to rush. But let's really look at not only what your mission is, but how you deliver it. Is that the way you want to deliver it? With COVID, do you need to change the way you deliver it?
Yes.
Is your new reality going to be completely different from what your old reality was? And give you someone who you can trust to say, okay, I'm going to right the ship. And then once you get it kind of righted, which usually takes us a couple of months, then we can say, okay, now we know who you're looking for. now that we've got it down, here's where you still have some issues, but here's where you've got all these opportunities, to go. Head that way. Look for someone who's going to take you where you want to go. Don't be reacting to the past.
And you're setting up the next person for success, obviously.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because then we say, okay, now we're searching for a visionary leader who has the vision for where the board wants to go. And we know there's a match, as opposed to just someone who's available and has experience in a few of the right areas. Now we can say, okay, we really need someone who's going to go this way because the staff's got this part.
Yeah.
And I think our consultants find over and over again, undervaluing the staff that's below the executive level is 90% of the problem when we go in. It's like,
Really?
actually, there are really smart people in your organization, especially in not-for-profits. Usually, yeah, they're down there and they're plugging away, they're doing their thing, they care about the organization. If you believe in it and empower them, a lot of your problems can be solved, and you can get to where your executive now can be more visionary and do more fundraising and more entrepreneurial kinds of things, because they're not stuck in the weeds.
So your interim process is, I guess, very intentional about having conversations with the leadership team beyond just the executive, and or what does that look like? Interviews, literally, and other conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I just finished doing one myself because as I was going to take over this company, I was like, well, I need to do this. So I stepped in, and, really getting into first working with the board. Does the board understand their role? Do they understand governance and oversight, and what that looks like tangibly? How do you really, what kind of reports should you be looking for? What would make you feel comfortable that what's going on in this organization and you can see ahead? We try to get the board thinking 5 to 10 years ahead. Are you doing anything now that might cause you a problem 5 to 10 years from now? Or is there something you could do right now that would create a huge opportunity 5 to 10 years now?
Right.
So, that's where the board needs to be. If they're finding themselves too much in the day to day, then we kind of help them with that. You need to get to a point where you have trust in your leadership to be able to handle the day to day. So doing that, but then at the same time you're doing that, you flip over to the staff side and say, okay, what have you been through? I would start every staff meeting with the senior staff where I was doing the interim to say, what's keeping you up at night?
Yeah.
What is bothering you? I don't know your business. I know how to do organizational management. I know how to run an organization, but I need to understand the passion. I need to understand what you care about so deeply that it really worries you. And for the first month or so, it was, am I going to lose my job?
Yeah, exactly.
Is the organization going to survive? We forget sometimes that there are people who care passionately about what we do that are on our staffs, and they haven't been communicated with, so they don't know. Is the world coming to an end for me? And so being able to say, well, here's what I know, and giving them an example of transparent communication, but also meaningful participation in the direction of the organization, and kind of getting that blend so that by the time you're ready to do a search, the board is confident that they're moving in the right direction. The staff knows how to keep the wheels on the bus and keep things moving day to day, but they all feel like they're connected. And then you need that interim piece. You need the in-between piece, which is the CEO. That is the traffic cop between the present moving and the future.
Yep,
it's
right.
Yeah, that's really rewarding when you see that happen. It's a wonderful thing.
Well, and I applaud the kind of credibility you bring by literally tackling some of these interim projects, as I know your consulting team has done quite a few. And of course, you bring a credibility, Dave, from your multiple executive experiences, many that I'm directly familiar with the Special Olympics. But why did you get into the nonprofit space, which of course I think brings the credibility you have now?
Well, it was interesting. When I started off, I was a teacher. I was teaching emotionally disturbed students in the Ozark Mountains. I can do a full Ozark accent if you would like. My people talk like this. I try not to. But so I was doing that, and I started volunteering for Special Olympics, and my students in my classroom didn't qualify for Special Olympics because they didn't have intellectual disability, they had emotional disability.
Right.
So I began to see two different aspects of this community, of the disability community, and I thought, this is they're such vibrant personalities, and there's talents, and there's passions, and everyone's missing it. All they can see is either, they're learning slower, or they have bad behavior or whatever, and they weren't seeing the people. And I kind of developed a passion for that.
Absolutely.
So then I moved from the Ozark Mountains up to Kansas City and was teaching in a high school there. And Special Olympics came to me and said, hey, you want to do this? thing. And of course, my mother thought I was stupid.
She didn't see that as a career path for you, I guess?
She did not. She wanted me to be a lawyer. So when I said I'm going to be a special ed teacher, she thought that the world had come to an end. And then when I did the almost impossible task of taking a pay cut from teaching to go from teaching to working for Special Olympics, she was sure that she had failed as a mother.
She came around. I
she
trust
did.
it. Yeah,
she did come around. But that kind of got me started on not just not-for-profit work, but advocacy work, and kind of seeing. Because that's what people in nonprofit worlds do is I think they tend to see what the rest of the world doesn't see, and brings it and elevates it, so that you can see the value and the potential.
Well, and that's something you brought to outside of the Special Olympics world. Obviously, you were successful in multiple stops at Special Olympics, but I wonder, Dave, what do you bring from those experiences, both leading Washington State, leading North Carolina, leading West Virginia, and obviously being part of Special Olympics International? I wonder what has the collective experience brought you that you still bring to the table now?
Listening to people, and not assuming you know the answer. Whether I was, because being the CEO for West Virginia Special Olympics, which I did just before going to North Carolina, that was very different than North Carolina. The whole ethos of the volunteer community there. In West Virginia, they were very, very proud of being from West Virginia. They wanted the absolute best because they wanted to prove to the world that they were not backwoods hicks.
Right.
That they were smart. They knew what they were doing. They chose to live there. This was their heritage. That was great. Pride was the huge thing there. North Carolina had a whole different feel to it. It had different regions. It was a much larger state, and there were different things. And I found in North Carolina that it wasn't one thing. It was probably 3 or 4 different things that motivated people working in South Africa or Tanzania or Myanmar or Syria. It was the same thing. The first thing I had to do was kind of figure out what's important to these people. Why are they, in spite of and in the face of all the things that they're dealing with, especially in third world countries or countries that were at war, why this? Why? And once you figure that out, you unleash a potential, because people are heard.
Right.
And they all of a sudden feel like, oh, wait, I'm not crazy. It is true that my son who is nonverbal actually has wisdom. And I thought it, but now someone else sees it. And then so that you get some momentum going then. So I think that's the one thing I've taken away, is that every situation I go into, I have something to learn from every person I meet. And then you just ramp that up to an organizational level. Every organization has its own ethos. Every volunteer board of directors, every staff, every core of volunteers has a reason they're doing it. And if you hear it and listen to it, you unleash that potential. And then the good director or executive manages it all. It's just how do you keep all that energy contained then and working together so they don't work against each other? And that's the magic of nonprofit management.
Yeah, I love that. And what a positive way to approach any organizational leadership opportunity, right? Is there something for me to learn here? And back to your earlier point, right? I think sometimes we feel the insecurity of needing to have the answers when we start as a leader, and you're saying treat it as an opportunity to learn, and that'll only enhance your leadership further.
Exactly. Take a breath.
Right.
Take a breath. And the whole idea of going into consulting for me was just, I'd had people say this, oh, you should be a consultant. You should be a consultant. You've got something. I was like, I am not about to tell anyone that I know the answers and that I am the solution to all their problems. That's just not going to work. But I can listen and help them find the solutions.
Yeah, co-create, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you're a great collaborator on that point. And well, and speaking of transitions that now you're managing, are there characteristics you've tried to identify? In other words, when it's time to leave an organization, you and I talk to a lot of nonprofit leaders that are pondering that. When is it time to move? When is it time to move up, move out? Have there been certain questions you posed to yourself as you've
Yeah.
made your journey?
Yeah, I developed early on this kind of, especially once I had actually realized I had a job that I could probably keep and do for a while,
Right.
because there was that time, as everyone,
Security, right?
yeah, their young career where you're like, oh my God, am I really going to do something for the rest of my life? I put myself on 5-year stops. And I would say, okay, I'm gonna do this for 5 years. And when you get to the CEO level, certainly you have organizational goals, and that's great and fine. But I always had my own personal goals. What's going what do I think I can accomplish in this role, in this organization over the next 5 years? So the best example I can do is the most recent one, which was Special Olympics Washington.
Yeah.
So I came in and I could see that programmatically the infrastructure just wasn't there. It had deteriorated over time for a bunch of reasons, but they had no programmatic infrastructure. There's no way they could grow. And the other thing was that they had enough to kind of keep things as they were going, but they certainly didn't have enough to dream. So I said, okay, in 5 years, my goal is that I'm going to get them to a point that they have infrastructure that is sustainable, and can handle the turnover, which, as you know, when you're dealing with a volunteer organization, turnover is a reality. And leave them with enough cash on hand to be able to weather a storm and feel like they're comfortable, and they can be more entrepreneurial about how they approach the mission and the vision and the future. So I got to that 5-year point. We had the infrastructure in place. It's still kind of working its way through, but it's there. People understand it. That's all fine and good.
Yep.
Then we got to the point we had money. Okay, so there's money there. Then I had to look to the future, and that's the key. Is okay. Now I've got to set another goal for another 5 years.
Right.
And that's where that's that critical moment as a leader, where you have to look and say, okay, where should this organization be in 5 years? And you can have multiple answers to that, but then the question is, do I have the energy, the passion, and the patience to get this organization from where we are now to that vision of what I see 5 years from now? And in my case, I was like, I've done this for like 40 years now.
Right.
And,
right.
I've done a lot. And the world's changing, COVID's changing a lot of things, but the world, the dynamics of why people volunteer is changing. Young people are way more powerful and influential than they used to be in the system, which is for good.
Yes.
And maybe it's not maybe my vision is too mired in what's going. And I see, if I really care about this organization, I think I need to let it go. And I need to let some new leaders take on, and I'll go off and help some other people and do some other things. But I had to be honest with myself. And I think that's what everyone needs to do, is kind of, know where you are, know where your organization could be, and then do a real honest gut check of, do I really want to do this? And not, if the answer is, well, I can hang on for another 5 years and just keep things the way they are and it'll be comfortable. Shame on you.
Not a good answer.
Shame on you.
Yeah, but given the mission of your organization, right?
Yeah.
You're doing
we
a
are
disservice.
passionate. Nonprofit people are passionate. We get things done when no one thought anything could be done. We bring hope to people, no matter what the mission is. We exist because we bring hope to people who were lost at some point. That's the reason we exist. So if you ever get to the point where you're going, oh, I'm going to just help and sustain this, and then no, step aside.
That's good. Because I wonder too, Dave, to some of our colleagues that, and maybe there's ego here. Well, in fact, not maybe, there is ego here when a nonprofit leader says, well, but I don't know if they can survive without me. I've been kind of the key leader. Do you run into that? Or I guess what you're offering is some reassurance that, hey, it's okay to step away.
Yeah, it's funny. I was on a call the other day of a lot of people who are interims. Not just with just Valtas, but other people in the field, and we were talking about turnover and oh gosh, turnover's great, and so I kind of raised the question. I said, okay, down in the ranks, we have to understand that there are career paths. So you have to, turn over something that should be happening. People should be growing. They should be changing. They should be, being ready for new skills and new positions. And so let's enable that. Let's, help them. It's not a horrible thing when someone's moving on because they got more skills and they're going to move their channel. But how many times do we find ourselves in an interim chair because the CEO stayed too long?
Yep.
And everyone's like, yep.
A lot of nodding of heads then.
Everyone's
right?
like, yeah, they do. It gets comfortable. It could, and the board's okay because they're not having to think or do a whole lot.
Yeah.
This guy or woman's been there for how long, and everything seems to be running, and this is great. But that's not why we exist.
Yes.
We don't exist to be comfortable. We exist to be on the edge. And what have we not uncovered yet? That we need to do. And so if there's not a hunger there, you need to move.
I love that. And again, you have the kind of self-imposed discipline, the 5-year plan,
Yeah.
which I'm interpreting. I mean, you have to leave at 5 years, but it
No.
is a discipline though, isn't it? At the 5-year mark.
Yeah. I stayed at Special Olympics International for 17 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and every 5 years and then it was like the first 5 years I was doing self-advocacy. The second 5 years I was doing sports for some reason. And then the other 5 years I was doing a bunch of different organizations, but then I really kind of drifted into more, nation building kinds of things outside the US, and ended up being CFO for the organization for a while just because they needed help. But I was committed to making a difference and not afraid to take on new roles and not afraid to take on new challenges. So it's, but I got to a point where I was like, yeah,
it's time to move.
Yeah, I think and this was a move back. It's like, I want to have more fun in the field again.
Right.
And I think people need to give themselves permission to do that. To say, I knew that I could go back. I'd run 2 states before. So I was like, yeah, this would be fun, and get to be closer to the athletes and closer to the families and the mission and games and all that. And I was like, yeah, I've got another 5-year stint in me. I think I'll, let's just go back and have some fun. So it puts you in control of your life as opposed to kind of being, at the whim of other people.
Well, and I think a lot of leaders, you're right, they kind of see a singular ladder, so to speak, and you had climbed the ladder to the international office, so to speak, but you remind us that maybe the ladder goes in different directions, or there are multiple ladders, including one that maybe goes back into an area of programmatic passion that clearly you had for Special Olympics.
Yeah. And society says you need to keep climbing up, and, screw society.
Society doesn't always know, right?
Society isn't going to be in your head. You are. So
you've got to live with those answers. Yeah,
exactly. So have fun with it.
Dave, you mentioned the interim experiences allow organizations to entertain perhaps very different leadership models, like, and there you said there in the Northwest, lots of organizations are entertaining the distributed leadership model. Talk about that. What is it, and why are you seeing more organizations going that way?
It's really an interesting thing. I hadn't really thought of it, and I think some of us that are older are like, oh my God, one more thing to learn. What are we going to do with this?
Right.
But it's like, Jesus, is there none? I thought we knew. It's really, I think, distributed leadership now, when we talk about that, it has multiple manifestations. So the idea is exactly what you would think about, is that there are multiple people and you've got decision making and authority that is distributed around the organization.
Okay.
So one model would be that you have, say, co-directors, and they're co-equal CEOs. One doing programmatic stuff, another one doing kind of back of the house stuff. One's mission forward, the other one is support services. So think finance, HR, the fundraising, all those kinds of things. Right. So you allow those 2 people, and they just kind of agree that they're going to work together, but they are equals. Okay, so that's one
One
model.
version, right?
One
Right.
version of it, yes. Then you can get into where you've got an organization, and it depends on how your organization looks. Another one is that the various departments now have taken on, because they have kind of unique, kind of mutually exclusive roles to play in the delivery of the mission. So you've got one who's handling, I'll take a domestic violence organization, which is one of the most recent ones that I was working with.
Right.
So one handles the shelter. Okay, how do you do that? And that's that person, and they have control of. And I think this is where you kind of it starts to the meat of it comes out, is they have control to run that shelter
Okay.
the way they know that shelter needs to be run. Then you've got services, support services person, like legal support services, and they run, okay, these are the things that we can do in the legal support services thing. Another in a housing area, another in the fundraising and administration area, and those people then agree they're all going to run, and the board says, okay, that's fine, we're going to let these people kind of run these together, and we'll allow them to just all get together, but we won't have a CEO.
But yeah, how do you break ties, Dave? I guess that's as I ponder,
well, that's,
and you already are anticipating this, I know, but yeah,
herein
how do we
lies the
deal with
problem.
that?
Yeah. So I was on a call the other day with a bunch of our consultants, because there are 6 of our consultants who are actively right now dealing with this discussion on with their clients about, should we go to a distributed leadership model? And I said, okay, I'm going to play the boomer moment here, because I'm the baby boomer in the group, and who ultimately gets to decide, and who ultimately gets fired if it goes wrong.
Right.
I mean, let's just call a spade here. This is the way how we do this. So, and they're like, well, that's the problem. I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought. So it's a lot of times now what you're seeing is this third model of it, which is what I really just think of as delegation.
Okay.
But, and just like I said earlier, believe in the people who are running the aspects of the organization. So in that domestic violence example that I had, the CEO sits and says, okay, I hear you, shelter person. You've got your budget, you've got your thing, you're making decisions about the programming that's going on there and all that, but let me be the one who is playing traffic cop about how do we meld the legal services with what you're doing? How do we blend this all together and make sure that we're getting the biggest bang for any buck that we spend in doing this? So it's really more of giving people authority in the various aspects of your organization, knowing that the CEO ultimately is going to have to make a decision.
Yeah, right.
Okay, but they're not doing it. It's not everyone do what I say because I'm the big boss. It's I'm the big boss, and so I have brought together the people who know the various aspects of our organization. Talk to me and talk to each other so that we're doing this collectively, and there's distributed leadership around the organization. So the focus, when we say distributed leadership, a lot of people think distributed authority. And you need to kind of, from our experience,
that
it's really what you're looking for is to maximize the leadership potential of the people who are below the CEO level, and say, hey, let's bring everyone together and let's do this. And everyone kind of develops an empathy for the CEO of, I get it, you've got to make a decision. Here's my best pitch for why it should be this way. Here's finance's best pitch for why it shouldn't be that way. Here, but ultimately we understand you've got to make this decision. It allows you to be more transparent in your leadership of how you run the organization when you do things that way. But it also allows for the CEO not to have to be, and the organization isn't limited by what the CEO knows.
Right. You've empowered that next tier of leadership, haven't you?
Yeah. And then if you fully embrace this concept of distributed leadership, it doesn't just stop there. You go all the way through your organization.
Top to bottom.
Every single person, the hourly person who's working a night shift at that shelter feels like they have some kind of authority. They feel like they've got some way, because you want them to be thinking about, how do we advance this mission? And if they were the CEO, what would they do?
Yeah, right.
And so it becomes more of a management philosophy as opposed to a management structure.
Gotcha. So there's still someone clearly in charge in that instance, but there's a leadership lesson there. It sounds like very clear.
Yeah. Now, there are some places that have been able to pull off like co-executive directors. And I think if the organization lends itself to a very clear line between those two,
yeah,
that can be. But, there's also human nature. People are wonky.
Well, right. Especially if they're used to it, right? Are used to a kind of a hierarchy, I would imagine, in many organizations.
Well, and, all it takes is, someone, eating fish in the lunchroom, and then next thing you know, it's like now we all hate that person.
Right.
So we don't like any of their ideas, so I think that, so you kind of have to guard against human nature there. But I think the other thing that's driving this whole thing is that I mentioned earlier, young people have so much more influence than they used to. We see in the volunteer world, when, back in the day, when, it used to be within organizations, you worked your way up. You'd start volunteering for an organization and you'd, like in Special Olympics, you'd hand out lunches, or you'd, do the traffic control, or you might be an escort or something. And you worked yourself up to the point that you felt like, I could be a coach. And then you worked yourself up to where I might be an official, or I might be an area director, or, whatever. And young people today are much more demanding. And they want social justice. They're sick and tired of this kind of, let's just muddle along world that us boomers created. Fortunately, you're a generation younger, so you don't have to take.
I don't have to accept that title.
You don't have to
right?
explain that yet. I'll own it for you there.
Yeah, thank you.
But they want to know that what they're spending their time on changes the world. Yeah. And they have a vision for how the world should be, and they don't have any patience for our crap.
Yeah,
right. And it's the same thing when they take a job now. It's like, they may be someone who's in an hourly position or whatever, but you need to respect them.
Yeah, and empower.
And empower them. And so when you say we've got a distributed leadership model that values the leadership potential of every single person in your organization, and values the ideas of everyone, then even if they're, at an entry level position, they feel like they're part of the mission. They feel like they're driving, and they've got some influence. And that makes them feel good about what they do, and that makes them stay longer, and it makes your mission and your vision move faster. So you have to be able to embrace that, and I think that when you do that, it's kind of a fasten your seatbelts.
Yeah, it helps the whole organization, right? It activates the whole organization, and you're right. I think a leadership lesson there you articulate very well is that if we're trying to recruit this next generation of talent, but we expect them to wait until they have to advance, 4 levels of the organization before they get to assert any leadership, they're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah. I remember working at a bank when I was in college, and I wanted to change something. I was the head teller. Thank you very much. And I wanted to change the way something happened, or something, a process that we did. And the manager of our branch was like, no, not going to do it.
You're not authorized to even speak on that subject, are
you? Right. And so finally I looked at him and said, okay, I get it. Okay. Here's the thing though. I just need an assurance from you that we're not going to change the rules, so that when I'm sitting in your chair or the chair above you, I get the same power.
Yes.
Because this is stupid. And this is a good idea that you're just dismissing because you think I'm beneath you. And so just be careful.
The lesson there. You're right. There's a lesson there.
Someday. Yeah. So
these young, talented next generation are going to be in these chairs
exactly
sooner than later, as you have pointed out.
Yes.
Well, Dave, this is fantastic because, again, the advice you're offering, I think, for leaders, both on their own career path and then their ability or inability, frankly, to bring in talent is critical. And so this helps shape that. Let me ask you a couple other, I guess, what I would call your greatest hits topics. And you're seeing it now, I'm sure, in Valtas. You referenced the boards with which you work. I'm guessing in many cases there's a transition. You're now working with a board. I'm finding, and I wonder what your opinion is given the COVID environment, but some boards are micromanaging, which is a challenge. Others are disengaged. And what are you seeing? And are there certain things you and your colleagues are particularly focused on when you work with a board?
Yeah, it's funny because, and it's not the whole board, it's individual people on the board.
Interesting. Good point.
It's so frequently what we hear is, and I've in the last 24 hours, I think I've had like 3 different conversations that are exactly the same. Oh, this one board member or these 2 or 3 board members, they get it, they're on board, they want to do this, but they don't want to offend the other board members by saying they disagree. And I think what we're seeing now is, one, COVID's got everyone kind of stressed out. Everyone's the future is very uncertain, especially in the not-for-profit sector, because everything's changing and all. So you kind of have to have nerves of steel,
right,
to kind of be on a board to begin with in this place.
Right.
So that's kind of got people fatigued. But there's just also this, I know what I need to do, but I don't want to be, if I say what I'm really thinking, then is it going to piss people off? And now I'm going to have to step up into it. And they're going to leave and I've got a leadership role. So you've got that going on. Then you've got the people who are, I'm panicked. Our organization is in transition. We've got all this COVID stuff going on. And so we need to hunker down and everything, we need to just find a way to recreate the past. And so they're firmly committed to recreating the past, which, by the way, spoiler, not going to work.
Yeah, that's why we're where we are now, probably.
Which is why you are, yeah. So those are difficult conversations. The challenge is when you're a consultant, or even when you're the CEO or the executive director, having that's a hard conversation to have.
Right.
Both with the board collectively and with the individuals. So what we're finding more often is we have to kind of say, okay, let's take a step back and let's go back to boardsmanship 101. What is your role? Your role is governance and oversight. So if you're in the weeds, step out of them for a minute.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I'm here, right? Or you're here in an interim role, right?
Yeah. So step out for a minute and look at your role. And it's, if something goes wrong with the organization, then it's the board they're going to have looked to, or the people in the future will look to and say, well, what were they thinking? Where were they trying to take us? If you can't answer that question, you're in trouble. So go back, ask yourself, where are we trying to take it? And then you're just going to have to build the nerve up to do this and confront it. And we can facilitate the discussion as a group, but you need to understand that each individual on that board is coming with different comfort levels, different history, different perspective on the organization. We were dealing recently with a board chair who'd been there for like 20 years. One of those mired, and we just have to go back to the past. Yeah,
they were stuck, right?
Yeah, the whole rest of the board is privately saying, no, that's not the way. And they have to man up or woman up, and say, look, as a member of the board, we need to have this discussion.
So that was that your strategy? You had to empower other board members to speak up, or how did you attack
because
that?
It's not the board shouldn't be following the executive director. The executive director is an employee of the board.
Right.
The board, the executive director is there to help the board navigate their own path. But they should control their own membership. They should control their own agendas and all those things. So kind of reminding them that here's your fundamental role. Go back to that. Stop worrying about all the ancillary stuff about the day-to-day and all this kind of stuff. Is this organization going to exist 5 years from now?
Yeah, right. Back to your 5-year question.
Yeah. What's it going to look like? And what are we as a board going to do to get there. And if someone on the board is standing in the way of that, this is not howdy doody time. This is not the happy hour.
Right.
This is you took an oath when you signed onto this board to put the organization before personalities, and you got to do that. So, and it's hard. It's really hard. So we joke sometimes that we really should hang out here at Therapist Shingles.
Yeah, you are. You really are serving in that role, aren't you? And that.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder, again, listeners, whether or not you're going through a transition, but as a leader, are you having that kind of strategic 5-year vision discussions with your board? I'm afraid many are not.
Right.
And it's good that, you are, Dave, helping provide the impetus to do just that.
Yeah. And it's even harder when you're in crisis, whether the crisis is just we don't have enough money to do what we're going to do, or we've got a leadership change and all that stuff. That's why the stability really is like a godsend.
Right.
So
they can focus on the strategy questions,
exactly,
right, as opposed to what are we going to do tomorrow?
Exactly.
Well, in speaking of topics that I'm encouraged seem to be more part of your world, my world, the nonprofit sector, is around DEI. And I'm hopeful, Dave, that it's not just talk, but talk about that. Well, are you seeing organizations more sensitive and more intentional about issues of DEI, particularly when they're trying to assure diverse candidates and ultimately diverse leaders at these nonprofit organizations?
Yeah, it's especially here in the Pacific Northwest, which is my immediate experience. But yes, we have clients that they look to see, do we have a consultant that we can send them who is from the BIPOC community? Do we have, people who, are sensitive or have history in being effective in that area? It's still in this kind of amorphous world of, it's one thing to talk the talk, it's another thing to walk the walk.
Right.
So a lot of times what we'll see is a client will say, we really want to use your services, but we really only want an interim or a person to lead the search if that person themselves are from a diverse community.
Yeah. Right.
And then that's them putting their money where their mouth is.
Right.
One of the first steps is to look at your supply chain, and and not-for-profits, that's the people that we hire. And do you put diversity on a high enough priority level to say, yeah, I'm willing to say no to someone if they don't come from that community, or at least show me that they can represent and help us move to where we need to be in this space.
Right.
So, and I think that last little bit is the piece that is the most challenging, but also where there's the most promise. If you can show that you've done your homework, the difference between, Martin Luther King birthday, just passed. So and everyone, sends out their quote.
Yeah.
Here's my favorite.
We're seeing it. We're seeing it for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's great. And certainly those are great quotes to live by and all that. But if you're only living them, that you're only reminded of them one day, that's not enough. So, so show that the difference between talking it and walking it. If you're going to be a CEO and you're an organization, what are you going to do to build? And it needs to be not just an immediate, I can do X, Y, and Z, because I can assure you, you can't just do X, Y, and Z and then flip a switch and your organization be diverse.
Yeah, exactly.
Not going to happen. It has to be across the organization, from the board to the staff and the whole staff, not just leadership. But, what is your organization doing to create job pathways? With diverse people in mind, and diversity is not just race.
Yeah, right.
There are a lot of different ways to be diverse. And I think it really is, ground yourself in why. Why is DEI so important? And it should be, for my mind, and of course I'm always right. Which I'm sure you remember.
That's why you're on the podcast, Dave.
Yeah. There you go. So for my mind, the reason you should be worried about this is people that have lived a different life than you have. They've interacted with the world from a different perspective than you have. They bring a wisdom. They bring understanding. My son and I just wrote an article about Martin Luther King and the legacy and all that. And my son's African American, and I'm white. And he's going to be 30 next month, which I think is hysterical.
Wow, I know.
I know.
Time flies, that's for sure.
Yeah, I say hysterical. What I actually mean is terrifying. But anyway, we wrote it, and we started off, and I was coming at this whole concept of the legacy of Martin Luther King from a white man's perspective.
Right.
Now, I've spent 30 years immersed in African American culture, immersed to the extent that I'm raising two children that are African American. And my son, like 3 or 4 different times in this, working on this article, he's like, "You don't get it yet."
Wow.
He says, "I can see, I see." What you're trying to do is you're trying to make it easier to pat yourself on the back. And you can't.
He wouldn't let you go that far, would he?
He wouldn't let me go that far. Yeah.
Right.
And he said, "No, this is a struggle." And I can tell you that he, as an African American man, now mind you, this is a kid who went to West Point. He's
Yeah.
he's
got credibility on many levels.
He's got his own. He can hold his own. Terrified, dealing with law enforcement one day.
Wow.
And he called me and he said, "Daddy, I just needed to talk and calm down." And he had been pulled over for speeding. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, everything was fine this time." But he was terrified in the time. And this was maybe 5 years ago. And he said, later I learned, in the time that he'd been driving, 5 times a law enforcement officer had pulled him over and come to the car with a drawn weapon pointed at him.
Yep.
That perspective is not something,
you and I are never going to, unlikely will have to experience that.
Right.
Ever.
So now put yourself in a marketing director's position. You want to market a product. If you don't know what that person, and it just this, this is a huge section of our population.
Yes, indeed.
And if you don't have the wisdom to ask and to engage people with diverse perspectives, talk to someone who has disability, whether it's
Right.
physical, sensory, intellectual, about how they interact with the world. You're leaving huge market segments untapped.
Yeah, that's just pragmatic, isn't it?
Right. If that's not the reason you're doing, if you're doing DEI because it's the new liberal cool thing to do, don't bother.
Yeah, right.
That's tokenism. And, thank you for thinking,
Yeah, but it's not gonna do it.
Yeah, it's just not going to do it. And I think what we're seeing now is everyone is more savvy to that. They're more savvy to, do you really genuinely believe this, or are you doing it because it's the cool thing? So I think if you're, I'm an old white guy.
Right.
That's, I can't fight that. But I can come to the table and say, I get why I need to listen to other people.
Well, you just anticipated my question, which is, if I'm not a person of color and I do aspire to leadership in the nonprofit sector, I need to be ready to articulate that in an authentic way, I guess, right,
Yeah.
David? Not just quote slogans, but maybe even more specifically the question, David, how does someone who's not a diverse candidate articulate in a way that will be meaningful?
I think you have to come in saying, I get it. Own the privilege that you may come from.
Right.
Whatever it may be. You can't erase it. That's fine. No one expects you to.
Yeah.
But you need to come in with humility and say, I get it. I also know that I'm a good leader. And a good leader knows how to listen. And I know how to find the people who can help us, help educate me, help educate us as a board, and who can help bring us along on the journey, because it's going to be a long journey.
Yeah, right. It's
You
not an
know,
overnight solution for
this
sure.
is not, yeah, this is not going to fix this overnight, which is kind of the essence of the Martin Luther King legacy piece of this is an ongoing struggle, but it's a struggle worth fighting. And the more people that are engaged, the easier the fight will become, but we're not there yet. And to just be able to talk that, and to be able to talk pragmatically why it's a good thing for the business, because you need to show that you're not a fake.
Yeah, right.
You know, and if you are a fake, yeah,
we don't want you.
You need to, yeah,
you're not
you
ready.
need to look, you need to look in the mirror and say, it's, you know, if that's you, that's you. Just don't apply for an organization at an organization that genuinely values this.
Yeah, so well put, Dave, and important advice for candidates of all types, but particularly those that need to better articulate that kind of diversity approach. And are there other things you're seeing in the best candidates and all the searches you all are involved in?
Yeah.
What are, I mean, I'm assuming they've got to be a fundraiser, they got to be a leader, they got to work with a board. Are there other things you would put on that list that the best candidates have?
I think it's when we see the best ones, it's usually, you know, from my experience, it has come with a lot of experience, but it doesn't need to have, you don't need to have a lot of lived experience to be able to approach it this way. And I think it's the humility, first of all, to say, you know, who knows what we're going to face 3 weeks from now,
Yep.
you know, or 5 years from now. So to say, but I'm someone who listens. I'm someone who understands the process of leadership, who understand, you know, I've got humility, I've got confidence, but then you need to be able to convince, and when we see this, everyone just kind of goes, oh, it's like,
you know, you've hit the jackpot.
You know you've hit the jackpot when someone says, here's the thing, I know how to lead. And I know how to lead through a variety of situations, not just one, but, you know, as things come at me, you know, I don't lose my cool. I know how to lead. And here's who I follow. Be able to say who you follow. Whose management style do you follow? Who's an inspiration to you leadership wise? Because that then gives people a sense of, oh wait, I could, if it's Lee Iacocca, then great. Right. Then people can read Lee Iacocca's book. If it's Tom Peters, they can read Tom Peters' book, you know. And so who do you follow? Know what you need. No one has it all.
Interesting.
Don't act like you have it all. Be able to, when I came to the board in Washington, I said, here's the thing. I've never lived in the Pacific Northwest before. I need you to help me navigate that, because doing business here is very different than the East Coast.
But you were self-aware enough to know that that was an area you needed to supplement.
Yeah. So there's no way. I'm not gonna blow smoke here and just say, oh yeah, I know how to do this. Here's, you know, I know I'm going to need your help in these areas, and just kind of own that. And then why do you want to be the new director, the new leader of this? And you have to be genuine in that. It's either, there's, in the nonprofit world, there tends to be this group of people, and they just kind of bounce around from one organization to the next. And it's like, right. Oh yeah, and they consider themselves to be the quintessential nonprofit leader because they can do it. And it's like,
just because they bounce around.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, but we don't want someone who's just, you know, like, I can serve in an interim role in any other organizations, but you know, you need someone who's your permanent leader, who's passionate about what you're doing, who's hungry for this shared vision that you have to come to life, not someone who can keep things moving as they were and everyone be comfortable. So be able to say why you're so passionate about this, you know, and those, as long as those things are all genuine, then that's when we know we've got someone who is a seasoned leader who's going to be able to handle whatever comes next.
It's
because
fantastic.
There's some weird stuff going to happen.
Well,
We all know that.
Well, and sorry to interrupt you because it's fantastic. And I just think that's such good advice for candidates out there that are trying to articulate what amounts to a personal case for support, right? You just said, if I can come in and make that case for authenticity, then I'm a good listener, I'm a good leader, that I am going to build on my experience, but I'm also willing to listen and learn in this new role. I just think you have strengthened your case for sure as a candidate. Dave, fantastic. Lots of notes I'm taking that we're going to surely include in the show notes for this episode. I wonder if I can ask you for a parting gift, as you know it's coming.
Yes.
What about a book that's been meaningful to you or one that you might recommend to our listeners?
Okay, I confess that I am a shameless, opportunistic. Yeah, I'm fickle when it comes to books. I just
sorry. You can go with the answer that's in your head right now. That's fine.
I just as I was struggling, I started reading, and I'd read Tom Peters before, In Search of Excellence.
Yeah.
He has a new one out that I'm just finished. And it's funny because the title of it is Excellence Now, Extreme Humanism.
Interesting.
And if you've read Tom Peters before, he's all about it's the people first. It's
right.
the people first. And, you can hear me talking, you can kind of hear that's kind of an influence of mine. But it's interesting because, if you've read his stuff in the past, you read it in the context of the past.
Right.
And this is a book that was written during COVID. And he kind of addresses that, and he says this is kind of his last book. We'll see.
Right.
But, just the importance of valuing the people who care about what you care about, and trusting them, and putting your and how to, and it's got little exercises in it to do. I don't know that all of them are mind-bogglingly new, but just something to remind us that some of the tried and true management philosophies are good, but when you put it into the new context of what we're dealing with now, it's just I'm lazy. Okay, I could have just read some of the other stuff.
Oh, let him curate it for you, right?
Yeah, okay. I could have tried to do the squeeze it into the COVID context, but he just did it for me, so it was great.
Well, as one who has In Search of Excellence on the bookshelf behind me, I'm delighted to realize or learn that he has something new. And so thank you for adding it to our wish list here on the podcast. But Dave's fantastic. I'm excited to get this episode out there. Where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing at Valtas?
Yeah, so our website is Valtas Group, so VALTAS Group.com. That's where we are, guiding leadership transition for social enterprises.
Well, happy to link people to that. Obviously, you're active on LinkedIn as well. We'll make sure people can find you there.
Yeah.
And
I tell you, when they go to the website, if they want to click on the blog, too, then that helps us make sure if they want to see, because we post, thought leadership articles on things like that are much along the line of what we've just been talking about. So if people are interested in that, they can click on there, and then they'll be on our mailing list, and we can send them some stuff.
Yeah, Dave, that's perfect. Delighted to do all of that, and I'll encourage our listeners to check out the show notes for that reason and many more. And again, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Dave as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas that can guide you on your professional journey and maybe gave you some things to think about as your organization contemplates this age of disruption that we are all facing. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. You can find out more about Dave, the Valtas Group, and all of the resources connected with this episode, which is number 141. As always, thanks for sharing this episode with just one other person on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe to the podcast. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you'll see the follow button in the top right, and it'll get you to all of the primary podcast platforms. Don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday, as well as bonus features we're producing every other month. If you like this episode, click on the episodes button on the top of the podcast page, and you can scroll through now what amounts to 141 great conversations like this one with Dave Lennox. Thanks as always for what you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.